World War II had just ended on December 2nd, 1945. Europe and parts of East Asia lay in ruins due to the unprecedented bombing raids undertaken by the Allies in the hope that they would end the war. The embers of this destruction were still smoldering when Christmas came around in 1945. 4,000 miles away in Fayetteville, West Virginia, a family's first Christmas in 6 years without the doom and gloom of a world war would also go up in flames and kindle the origins of one of the most mysterious disappearances in U.S. history. At approximately 1 a.m. on Christmas Day 1945 in the Appalachians, a devastating fire broke out at the family home of George and Jenny Sodder. 4 of the 10 Sodder children survived. 1 was abroad after the war, and the other 5 vanished the night of the incident. None of their remains were discovered in the aftermath of the devastating fire. Although authorities determined the cause to be faulty wiring, strange occurrences in the days and hours leading up to the tragedy and evidence of sabotage at the Sodder residence indicated something far more sinister had happened than a simple house fire. In this Bad Things investigation, we look at what happened, who could have done it, and what most likely happened in the disappearance of the 5 Sodder children. The Sodders' background story exemplifies immigrants coming to America and making good. George Sodder was born Giorgio Soddu in 1895 in Tula on the Italian island of Sardinia. He immigrated to the United States 13 years later, accompanied by an older brother who returned home after both boys had cleared Ellis Island's customs. George, as he became known, rarely discussed why he had fled his native country. Sodder later found employment transporting water and other supplies to railroad employees in Pennsylvania. Later in Smithers, West Virginia, he found permanent employment as a driver. Then he established his own transportation company, initially transporting fill soil to construction sites and later transporting regionally mined coal. George would marry Jenny Cipriani, the daughter of a storekeeper in Smithers, who had also immigrated from Italy as a child. The Sodders settled in a 2-story timber frame home 2 miles north of Fayetteville, a town with a substantial population of Italian immigrants. One local official described them as one of the most respected middle-class families around, as George's business flourished. George had strong opinions on several topics and was not shy about expressing them, occasionally alienating people. His staunch opposition to Italian dictator Benito Mussolini had sparked several heated confrontations with other immigrant community members. By 1945, the Sodders were raising 10 children. Our timeline starts before that disastrous Christmas morning with strange encounters and bizarre happenings that only fuel the fire that this tragedy was far from an accident. Several odd occurrences occurred in the months preceding the fire. First, an unidentified job seeker approached Sodder at his home. After George told him he did not need help, the man looked up at the electrical box outside and said, "This is going to cause a fire someday." George was confused at this remark, as he had recently had the power supply company inspect the electrical cables, and everything was in working order. Just weeks before the fire, another notable visitor paid the Sodder home a visit. A local salesman tried to sell them life insurance. Infuriated by George's refusal, the salesman threatened, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." A few days before Christmas, the older Sodder brothers spotted a peculiar vehicle parked along Highway 21 for a few days. The man in the vehicle intently watched the Sodder children as they returned home from school. Christmas Eve, 1945. At approximately 10:30 p.m., Jenny and George were set to retire for the night with their 3-year-old daughter, Sylvia. Marion, the oldest girl, had brought gifts from the dollar store where she worked and given them to the younger children. Jenny allowed them to stay up later than usual to play with their new gifts. However, she reminded Morris, aged 14, and Louis, aged 9, that they needed to close their chicken coop and feed the livestock before bed. Early Christmas morning. At 12:30 a.m., the phone rang. Jenny awoke and proceeded downstairs to answer it. The caller was a woman whose voice she did not recognize, who asked for a name she did not recognize, while laughter and glassware clinking could be heard in the background. Jenny informed the caller that she had dialed the incorrect number, later recalling the woman's weird laugh. She ended the call and returned to bed. Marion was sleeping on the couch when Jenny saw that the doors were unlocked and the curtains had not been drawn. The children typically secured the home before retiring for the night, but not this evening. Jenny locked the door and drew the curtains, presuming the children had retired to the attic. The fire breaks out. Jenny awoke at approximately 1 a.m. when, as she later described, something hit the roof like a rubber ball. It rolled and hit the ground with a thump. However, she paid it little mind and returned to her sleep. She awakened after another half hour to the smell of smoke. George, Jenny, 3-year-old Sylvia, Marion, John, and George got out of the house. Unfortunately, the fire had begun to spread up the attic staircase. Jenny explained that when the Sodders shouted up to the attic, they received no response from the younger children. I ran to the bottom of the stairs where the children were supposed to be sleeping. I yelled and yelled, and 2 boys, John and George Jr., came stumbling down. Their hair was singed by the flames. John stated in his initial interview with the police after the fire that he went up to the attic to wake up his sleeping siblings, but he later altered his story to say that he only called up there and never actually saw them. Morris, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, aged 5, never made it down the stairs. We have all heard the phrase, when one thing goes wrong, everything will. The Sodders' attempts to save their 5 children stuck in the burning house epitomizes this phrase. George recalled that a ladder was permanently resting against the side of his home for routine maintenance such as gutter washing and roof repairs. George's first thought was to use this ladder to reach the children. Nevertheless, according to reports from the night of the fire, the ladder was not in its usual spot. Unbeknownst to them, it was lying in a roadside gully away from the residence. The water barrel that could have been used to extinguish the fire was frozen solid. Marion then attempted to call the fire department, but the phone was inoperable. An operator was unavailable, even after running to a neighbor's residence to make a call. Eventually, a man driving by saw the flames and called the fire station from a phone in town. George came up with another idea to save his children. If he drove his work vehicles to the side of the house and climbed over them to the upper window, he may be able to reach the children. George discovered that neither of the vehicles would start when he attempted to start them, despite having worked flawlessly the day before. While the Sodder family endured this series of misfortunes, their home burnt to the ground in only 45 minutes. The firefighters did not arrive until approximately 8 a.m. At that point, only debris and embers remained. The search for the children continued until 10 a.m. with no success. The state police initially determined that defective wiring caused the fire, but retracted this conclusion. Then Fayetteville Fire Chief F.J. Morris conducted a comprehensive investigation and discovered neither evidence of corpses nor evidence of faulty cables to contradict the ruling. The following day, Charles Payne from the funeral home went to the site to retrieve the corpses, but he discovered no remains. The coroner convened a commission several days after the fire to ascertain the cause of the blaze. Interestingly, one of the jury members was the man who told George that his children and home would be destroyed by fire. Unsurprisingly, the jury also determined that defective wiring was responsible for the fire. The Sodders, however, disagreed, and who could blame them when new strange revelations came to light? Several additional discoveries increased the Sodders' uncertainty about their children's fate. The telephone technician informed them that someone had cut the telephone lines. This could be why Marion could not make a phone call, and not because the phone lines had been burned. During the blaze, neighbors saw a man stealing block and tackle from the Sodders' property. Later, the police apprehended him, and he confessed to having climbed the pole and severed the wires. The man said he believed he had cut the electrical cables, but severed the telephone wires instead. No one appears to be aware of the outcome of this arrest, or why the police did not follow up on it. A second witness, a bus driver who worked the late shift, reported seeing fireballs fall on the roof. After the snow had melted a few months later, Sylvia discovered a small, dark green rubber-like ball in the undergrowth. George, recalling his wife's description of a thud on the roof before the fire, said that it resembled a pineapple bomb hand grenade or another combat-related incendiary device. Contrary to the fire marshal's conclusion, the family later contended that the fire had begun on the roof, although there was no means to verify it. With all the strange events around the case, an obvious bedfellow would be the various theories surrounding the disappearance of the 5 Sodder children. These range from insurance claims by George's ex-employer, Fiorenzo Gambel Gianatolo, a listed recipient of a $1,500, about $20,000 in today's money, insurance policy and a mortgage clause on the Sodders' property, to variations of mafia involvement and child trafficking. None of these theories have any substance and are circumstantial at best. What most likely happened to the Sodder children, according to the Bad Things crew? Could the reason behind the lack of the children's remains be because of an amateur fire department and, unfortunately, George Sodder himself? Due to war-related personnel shortages and reliance on individual firefighters contacting each other, the fire department did not arrive until at least 7 to 8 hours after the house caught fire. Chief F.J. Morris said the next day that his inability to drive the fire engine slowed the already sluggish response time, as he had to wait until someone who could drive was available. The firefighters, one of whom was Jenny's brother, could do little more than examine the remains in the Sodders' basement. Morris informed the Sodders at 10 a.m. that no bones had been discovered, as might have been expected if the other children had been in the house during the fire. Contemporary fire experts have cast doubt on this claim. 2 hours is not even close to a thorough search. Today the search would take days and possibly weeks. It wasn't that the remains were not there necessarily, but they might have been missed by people who weren't professionals, and they didn't search for very long. Another expert added, "All the experts the family consulted agree that more remains would have been found from a fire that only burned for 45 minutes before the roof fell into the basement. But the fire didn't burn for 45 minutes. It burned all night long and into the next morning. When the fire department did finally appear, it was still hot and they had to water the site down before conducting their search." We must remember that this tragedy occurred in 1945, that it was winter, and that the house was made of timber and heated with coal. There would have been a large coal stockpile in the basement, and the house would have collapsed into this coal bed. In a few hours, the coal could easily reach the required temperature for cremation. If a thorough search had been conducted in the days that followed, bones would likely have been discovered. But cremated remains are incredibly fragile, which brings us to the possibility that George, by his hasty actions, denied himself peace until his death. Chief Morris instructed George to leave the scene alone so the State Fire Marshal's office could conduct a more comprehensive investigation. George and his wife could not bear the sight of the burned remains after 4 days, so he bulldozed 5 feet of dirt over the site to create a memorial garden for the lost children, effectively destroying any skeletal remains. It would likely be possible to find traces of skeletal remains using today's technology, but it would have been exceedingly difficult to find charred, crushed bone buried in the ground in 1945. In August 1949, George persuaded Oscar Hunter, a pathologist from Washington, D.C., to oversee a new investigation of the soil at the burn site. After an exhaustive investigation, some artifacts were discovered, including the children's dictionary and some coins. Several small bone fragments that were identified as vertebrae were also unearthed. The bone fragments were sent to Smithsonian Institution specialist Marshall T. Newman. It was determined that they were all lumbar vertebrae from the same individual. Due to the age of the individual to whom the vertebrae belonged, they were unlikely to belong to any of the 5 children. Newman added that there was no evidence of fire exposure on the bone. According to the report, the vertebrae likely originated from the soil George had used to bulldoze the site. Later, it was allegedly verified that the bone fragments originated from a nearby Mount Hope cemetery, but explanation why or how they ended up at the fire site was given. According to its records, the Smithsonian returned the bone fragments to George in September 1949, and their current location is unknown. In our opinion, the children had died in the fire, and fire investigations in the 40s weren't like the detailed forensic investigations we have now. In addition, this was a rural fire department made up of volunteers with limited equipment and training. George's destruction and contamination of the scene made it impossible for a proper search and investigation into the fates of his 5 children. The question of what or who started the fire is debatable. Was it started by an electrical fault, or was it arson? Leave us a comment and tell us what you think. In 1952, George and Jenny installed a large billboard on Route 16 with photographs of the missing Sodder children and a $10,000 reward. The board remained there for 37 years. In the end, they had spent more than $15,000, or more than $200,000 today, on private investigators and travel expenses across the country, following up leads. George Sodder passed away in 1969 at age 73. Jenny Sodder passed away in 1989. She kept growing flowers at the site where the children vanished until she passed away at the age of 85. The Sodder parents swore that they would look for their children until their deaths, and they kept their word. If you love our content and want to support the channel, feel free to check our web shop where you can find exclusive true crime merch brought to you by Bad Things.